They didn't even have the courage to say it to my face. Just an email at 4:47 p.m., sent while I was still on the warehouse floor keeping their system alive. After everything I designed, everything I fixed, everything I saved, they cut me loose like I was the problem. The humiliation stung deeper than I expected, especially knowing the very executives smiling upstairs were standing on work they claimed as their own. But they forgot one thing, something small, quiet, and powerful they never bothered to understand. If stories like this hit home, subscribe and tell me your experience in the comments. When people talk about warehouses, they picture dusty shelves, fluorescent lights, and workers pushing carts down long aisles. What I walked into at Skybridge Logistics 3 years ago was worse. An aging, chaotic maze where shipments piled up faster than anyone could move them. Pallets sat abandoned in corners like forgotten children. Forklifts beeped constantly because no one could see more than 5 feet ahead. Workers were exhausted, frustrated, and blamed for mistakes caused by the broken system around them. And me? I was hired to fix bottlenecks, which was the corporate way of saying perform miracles. I took one long look at that warehouse and knew they didn't need miracles. They needed a complete rebirth. The Phoenix desert sun had already toasted the building to 100 degrees inside by midday, the cooling system barely clinging to life. Trucks lined up outside waiting to unload, engines idling, drivers cursing under their breath because delays were so predictable they planned their schedules around them. Skybridge was bleeding money in insurance claims, labor overtime, missed delivery windows, and customer complaints. Mason Clark, the CTO, kept telling the board the problems were temporary setbacks. I knew better. These were structural failures, rooted deep in the bones of the operation. And yet, I felt something spark in me. I've always been drawn to broken things, not because I enjoy fixing them, but because I see the potential buried underneath. I spent my first weeks walking the floor at dawn, clipboard in hand, watching the morning rush unfold. Workers like Miguel and Tara would give me tired smiles as they maneuvered pallets around blind corners. They'd been here for decades, and despite all the chaos, they still cared. Their stories fueled me. They deserved better than what Skybridge gave them. I mapped every movement, tracked every delay, studied every choke point. I watched conveyor belts seize up under uneven load distribution, scanners glitch out when humidity rose even a few degrees, and trucks rerouted 3 times before finding the correct bay. The warehouse's nervous system was misfiring non-stop, but underneath all that noise, I could see what it could become. I started redesigning the flow from scratch, traffic patterns, scanning sequences, load balancing, zone assignments. I rebuilt the K routing structure so even a rookie could jump in without sinking the operation. But my real breakthrough came when I realized that every system in the building was speaking a different language. Nothing was integrated. Nothing communicated. Everything relied on human intervention to keep it alive. They didn't need another patch. They needed a single heartbeat guiding the entire operation. That was the moment I envisioned the core hardware module I later built through my own company, a streamlined processing unit designed not to think for the warehouse, but to coordinate it with perfect timing. I installed sensors that tracked movement down to fractions of a second, redesigned pallet flow to eliminate blind corners, and implemented routing so efficient trucks turned over in a third of the time. Within 6 months, Skybridge went from a liability to one of the Southwest's fastest turnaround hubs. Mason strutted through the floor like he'd been the mastermind behind it. Executives brought investors to tour our innovation, and the workers? For the first time in years, they weren't drowning. Overtime dropped, injury rates plummeted, productivity skyrocketed, and me? I kept my head down, working, improving, refining, making sure every piece operated flawlessly. I didn't complain when Mason erased my name from presentations. I didn't argue when Leo, the CFO, hinted that consultants like me should feel grateful for any visibility at all. I swallowed it. All of it. Because deep down, I believed good work would eventually speak for itself. What I didn't realize then was that some people will bulldoze right over you to take credit for the foundation you poured with your own hands. But I also didn't realize something else. While they were busy celebrating themselves, I was building something they could never control. When Skybridge hired me, they didn't just need a systems overhaul, they needed a lifeline. The board was panicking quietly behind closed doors, praying no one would notice how close they were to losing their biggest regional clients. What they didn't understand was that failing logistics isn't a sudden collapse, it's a slow bleed. Every missed delivery, every jammed conveyor, every frustrated customer chips away at a company until one day there's nothing left to rescue. I saw that truth the moment I walked into their headquarters for the first strategy meeting. Mason sat at the head of the table, suit pressed, confidence overflowing, selling the illusion that he had everything under control. But the data on the screens behind him told a different story. Mountains of delays, weeks of backlog, complaints climbing like a staircase to nowhere. Leo, the CFO, kept rubbing his forehead like he was trying to push the numbers back into something less embarrassing. They needed answers, but none of them were ready to admit how deep the problem went. When they turned to me, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I walked them through the structural flaws, outdated routing logic, misaligned workflows, and a shockingly fragile system held together by habit and luck. The room went silent. I could feel their discomfort pressing against me, but it didn't matter. You don't fix a crisis by pretending it's not there. What I proposed wasn't a bandage, it was a rebuild. A complete redesign of the warehouse's flow, infrastructure, and timing. The board grilled me, skeptical of every suggestion. Mason acted supportive, but I could already see calculations behind his eyes, like he was tallying how much credit he could siphon off the moment things improved. Even so, they approved the plan, reluctantly. I spent the next 9 months buried inside that warehouse. Dawn to midnight, covered in dust and sweat, listening to workers tell me where things truly broke down. Management never asked them. I made them my frontline advisors. They taught me the real pain points, where shipments piled up, where equipment died at the worst moments, where outdated policies forced people into impossible positions. With that insight, I restructured the entire workflow, taking what was once a chaotic maze and shaping it into a smooth, predictable rhythm. I added new scanning checkpoints, simplified the loading sequence, and introduced real-time visibility boards that workers actually understood. The more I implemented, the more the place transformed. The floor started moving like a living organism, each part aware of the other, each shift balanced so no one carried a disproportionate load. Efficiency climbed so sharply, the board began using my weekly reports as ammunition to negotiate better contract terms with partners. They didn't say thank you, not once. To them, this was Skybridge's system, Skybridge's innovation, Skybridge's comeback. I should have seen the warning signs when Mason started referring to the project as his strategic blueprint, or when Leo started hinting that they might reevaluate consultant contributions once the system went live. But I was too buried in the work to care. I was chasing perfection, tuning workflows, tightening timing windows, eliminating friction anywhere it lingered. The warehouse began running with a smoothness that made even longtime workers stop and stare. One of the team leaders told me, half joking, "If they don't give you the keys to this place, they're out of their minds." I laughed at the time. I didn't realize the truth behind his joke. Skybridge valued results, but not the people who delivered them. I thought building something remarkable would finally earn me my place. Instead, I was unknowingly setting the stage for the moment. They would decide they no longer needed me at all. The day it happened wasn't dramatic at first. It was one of those long, dusty Phoenix afternoons where the heat settles on your skin like a second shirt, and the warehouse hums with the steady rhythm of a system I had spent years reshaping. I was standing near Dock 12 reviewing throughput numbers on my tablet, making sure the late afternoon surge wouldn't choke the loading lanes. Everything was flowing exactly how it should. Clean, smooth, efficient. Then came the sound. A sharp email ping that sliced through the noise like a blade. I glanced down automatically, expecting a routine update. Instead, I saw the subject line: "Immediate action required, personnel transition." I didn't need to open it to know. My stomach tightened the way it does when a storm rolls in before you even see the clouds. I tapped the screen anyway. Dear Catalina, following our recent completion of the Skybridge Operations Revitalization Initiative, we have reassessed our organizational needs moving forward. Your role as lead systems architect will conclude effective Friday, November 18th. Please coordinate with HR regarding transition procedures. Sincerely, Mason Clark, Chief Technology Officer. That was it. After everything I built, after every night I stayed past midnight tuning variables and redesigning flows, after the sweat, the bruised shins from climbing metal racks, the endless troubleshooting sessions, I got 4 sentences, not even a phone call. 4 cold sentences delivered at 4:47 p.m. while I was still on the floor ensuring their system didn't crack under pressure. I felt the humiliation hit first, hot and sharp, pulsing at the back of my throat. A few workers saw me freeze, and one of them asked if everything was okay. I forced a nod because I wasn't about to let Skybridge steal my dignity in front of the very people who kept the place alive. Without a word, I walked toward the mezzanine where the glass-walled executive offices overlooked the floor like a fortress above the people doing the real work. Mason was in one of those offices at that very moment. I could see him through the glass, laughing with a group of visiting board members as he clicked through a slideshow. My slideshow, the color-coded operational maps I created, the timing models I designed, the flow diagrams I'd sketched by hand when the software crashed, and there at the bottom of the screen was the title, Strategic Systems Architecture, presented by CTO Mason Clark. My name wasn't anywhere, not a footnote, not a mention, nothing. As he spoke, he gestured confidently, as if the successes he described had been birthed by his own hands, as if he'd ever once stood sweating on the floor trying to untangle a pallet jam at 2 a.m. Watching him was a punch to the chest. The betrayal wasn't subtle, it was intentional. It had been planned. I realized then that the email wasn't a sudden decision. It was the final step in a process that started